My name is Valor Becker. Christmas Eve at our Lake Placid lake house was always the same. 200 white lights on the trees string quartet in the corner, every local power broker holding a glass of vintage champagne. Dad clinked his knife against Crystal and announced my engagement to his partner's son right there in front of everyone. Applause rippled through the room. I set my glass down and said, "No." The music stopped. 50 faces turned. Dad's smile froze into something ugly. Mom's eyes went wide with panic. Before anyone could speak, they each grabbed an arm and marched me through the French doors onto the back terrace. Snow poured down in thick sheets. Dad hurled my already packed suitcase after me. It burst open clothes, scattering across the frozen stone. Mom screamed, "If you won't do what's best for this family, then get out and survive on your own." The heavy glass door slammed. The lock clicked. I stood barefoot in my thin silk dress while the wind cut straight through me, temperature already 20 below. I pounded once. No answer. A motion light snapped on next door. An older woman in a long wool coat stepped off her porch, walked through the hedge without hesitation, and looked me dead in the eye. "Come inside before you lose your toes, sweetheart," she said, voice calm as steel. "Get in here. By tomorrow morning, they'll be the ones begging on their knees. If you've ever been thrown out by the people who raised you or had a stranger save your life on the coldest night of the year, drop your story below. Where did it happen to you? I read every single one. Subscribe so you don't miss what happened next. Trust me, it only gets wilder." The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the howling wind like a knife. I stood in the entryway, dripping melted snow onto an old Persian rug. The heat hit me all at once, thick real heat from a crackling fireplace 20 feet away. My fingers burned as blood rushed back into them. The woman who had pulled me in closed the door, turned the deadbolt, and gave me a small, steady smile. "You're safe tonight," she said simply. "No one is getting through that door unless I let them." She took my coat, what was left of it, hung it on a hook, and pointed me toward an armchair by the fire. A minute later, she pressed a mug of tea into my shaking hands. It was strong, sweet, and scalding. I wrapped both palms around it like it was the only solid thing left in the world. She sat across from me, hands folded in her lap, waiting. Not pushing, just waiting. I took one sip, then another. My teeth had finally stopped chattering. "I'm sorry," I managed. "I don't even know your name." "Ruby Langston," she answered. "I've lived next door for 38 years. And you're Valor Becker." I've heard that name shouted across the hedge more times than I can count. I flinched. She noticed but didn't apologize for the truth. "Tonight was different," I whispered. "They've threatened to throw me out before, but they never actually did it. Not in front of everyone. Not on Christmas Eve." Ruby nodded once. "I was taking the trash out when I heard your father roar something about family duty and business partners. Then I heard your mother scream that you were ungrateful. After that came the sound of the door locking. I figured it was time to stop just listening." I stared into the fire. The flames blurred. "They've been planning this engagement for months," I said, voice flat. "The guy is 34, divorced once already, and his father controls half the commercial real estate loans in the county. Dad says marrying him is the only way to protect the lifestyle I've always had. I told them I'm not for sale." Ruby made a soft sound, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I said the same thing to my own father when I was 22, she replied. "Difference is, I left with nothing but the clothes on my back and $50 in my pocket. You at least have a suitcase." I glanced toward the window. My clothes were still scattered across their terrace like trash. "They'll calm down by morning," I said, more to myself than to her. Ruby raised an eyebrow. "People who lock their daughter outside in negative 20-degree weather don't usually wake up full of remorse." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew she was right. She disappeared down a hallway and came back with a thick quilt and a pair of wool socks. She draped the quilt over my shoulders and knelt to pull the socks onto my frozen feet herself like I was a child. No one had done that for me since I was 6. "You're staying in the guest room," she said. "Bathroom's first door on the left. There's a new toothbrush in the drawer. Take a shower if you want. Water's hot." I opened my mouth to thank her, but the words stuck. She waved it off. "I'm not doing this for gratitude. I'm doing it because somebody should have done it a long time ago." I sat there long after she went to bed. The fire settled into glowing coals. The house creaked softly around me, old wood expanding in the warmth. For the first time in years, there were no footsteps in the hallway outside my door. No sudden shouting, no, waiting for the next explosion. I pulled the quilt tighter and stared at the embers until my eyes burned. Safety wasn't something I was used to feeling. It almost hurt. Eventually, I climbed the stairs, found the guest room, and crawled under clean sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. My body gave out the second my head hit the pillow. I didn't dream. I didn't hear a single sound all night. Christmas morning sunlight slipped through the lace curtains and woke me before the alarm. I came downstairs to the smell of cinnamon rolls baking and fresh coffee. Ruby was already at the kitchen table, 2 plates set out like this was normal. She slid one toward me without a word. I sat. The roll was still warm. I ate half before either of us spoke. She put her fork down and looked straight at me. "Valor, do you want out for good, or are you just waiting for them to apologize so everything goes back to the way it was?" The question hit harder than any slap. I set my coffee down too hard. It sloshed. "I don't know how to want something I've never had," I said. She waited. I stared at the table. The words came out slow at first, then faster. "When I turned 18, they closed every account that had my name on it. Dad said adults handle their own money, then handed me a debit card with a $200 monthly limit. I was still living under their roof, paying for college with loans they co-signed so I could never leave without ruining my credit." Ruby didn't blink. 2 years later, Grandma died. She left me a trust. Dad sat me down and said if I ever tried to touch it before I proved I was responsible, he'd make sure the bank froze it forever. I believed him. I was 20. I swallowed. Then, when I was 20, I came home with a C on a midterm. Mom took my phone, my laptop, my car keys. Dad changed the code on the house alarm and locked me in my room for 3 days. No food after the first night. Just water from the bathroom sink. They said it was to teach me discipline. The kitchen was completely silent except for the tick of the old wall clock. Ruby leaned forward. Her eyes were steel. "I ran from a father exactly like that when I was 22, she said quietly. He controlled every dime, every friendship, every thought in my head. I left with a duffel bag and a bus ticket. Best decision I ever made." She paused, then added, "My son Miles grew up watching me rebuild from nothing. He's now the CEO of Langston Capital, the same firm your father has worked at as CFO since before you were born." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. The room tilted. "What did you just say?" "You heard me?" Her voice never rose, but it carried the weight of 40 years. "Miles sits at the top. Your dad answers to him. And Miles has been looking for a reason to clean house for a very long time." I couldn't breathe. The cinnamon roll turned to ash in my mouth. Ruby reached across the table and closed her hand over mine. "You're not alone anymore, Valor. Not tonight. Not ever again if you decide you're done." I stared at our joined hands. Something inside my chest cracked wide open, something I didn't even know was still there. The doorbell rang that afternoon while the cinnamon rolls were still cooling on the rack. Ruby dried her hands and went to open it. A gust of cold air swept in with the tall man on the porch. He brushed snow off his dark overcoat, stepped inside, and pulled his mother into a quick, hard hug before turning to me. Ruby closed the door against the wind. "Valor, meet my son Miles." He hung his coat, shook my hand with a grip that was firm but careful, and gave me the smallest nod of acknowledgement, nothing more. Then he headed straight for the kitchen table like he already knew exactly where he belonged. Ruby poured him coffee without asking. He drank half the mug, standing up, eyes scanning the room, taking inventory. When he finally sat, the silence stretched just long enough to feel heavy. "I was on the phone with Mom when the fight started last night," he said. "I heard every word through the window. Sounded like a declaration of war." I wrapped both hands around my own mug and said nothing. Ruby slid into the chair opposite him and folded her hands. "Tell her what you told me this morning." Miles set the mug down with a soft clink. 3 years ago, internal audit flagged irregularities in certain discretionary funds. Every trail died at the CFO's signature. No one would talk. Everyone was terrified of Calvin Becker. I needed a direct link that couldn't be explained away as accounting error. "Last night you handed it to me on a silver platter." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I've spent the morning pulling preliminary threads, offshore routing codes that match accounts registered to entities with Becker in the name. Shell LLCs in Delaware, a pattern that repeats like clockwork every December for over a decade. But I still need the one piece that ties the theft directly to intent, not just negligence." He looked at me, then really looked. "You lived in that house. You saw the private statements, the off-books credit cards, the safe behind the painting in his study. Tell me something only someone inside would know." My pulse hammered in my ears. I stared at the steam curling from my coffee. "When I was 19, I said, voice low, he came home drunk after the company holiday party. Bragged that the bonus pool was his personal ATM. Said he moved the money in chunks small enough that no one would ever notice. Laughed that by the time anyone did, he'd be retired in the Caymans with a tan and a yacht." Miles didn't blink. He pulled a small leather notebook from his inside pocket and wrote a single line. "That's witness testimony," he said. "Enough for a subpoena." He stood, already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling legal now. We open the books tonight. By tomorrow morning, the board will have everything they need to suspend him pending full investigation." Ruby reached across the table and covered my trembling hand with hers. Miles paused at the doorway, phone to his ear, and looked back once. "This ends this week, Valor. One way or another." He stepped into the study and closed the door. The low murmur of his voice carried through the walls for the next 3 hours, steady, relentless, final. Snow kept falling for days, thick and silent over Mirror Lake. Miles became a shadow moving through the house. He never slept more than 4 hours, never ate at the table with us. He lived in Ruby's study with the door locked, the old desktop fan whirring to keep the printer from overheating. Every time he emerged, he looked thinner, eyes red from staring at spreadsheets. I became his silent assistant. He would slide a single page across the kitchen table at breakfast, a bank transfer from 2017, a signature I recognized as Dad's, an account number I'd seen on statements he used to wave in my face when I asked for gas money. I confirmed dates, amounts, the exact wording of threats he'd made if I ever questioned him. Each answer I gave was another nail. One night he came out carrying a flash drive instead of paper. "Sit," he said. He plugged it into Ruby's ancient laptop. A folder opened 11 subfolders labeled by year. Inside each were scans of handwritten notes, emails Dad thought he'd deleted, and metadata showing transfers routed through the Caymans, then Delaware, then back to accounts titled Becker Legacy Trust, Becker Future Holdings, Becker Children's Education Fund. There had never been money for my education. The worst was a 2014 voice memo recovered from a server backup. Dad's voice, drunk and laughing to someone on speaker, "Let Delaney take the fall. By the time anyone looks, he'll be ruined and I'll be untouchable." Miles clicked another file, a photograph of Frank Delaney leaving the building with a cardboard box security flanking him. Another photo 6 months later, same man 20 pounds lighter standing outside a foreclosure sale. Then came the letter, None of us expected an unsent email from Frank to his wife, dated the night before he disappeared from Albany. If anything happens to me, know Calvin Becker framed me for everything. I have proof hidden in the attic. Tell the kids Daddy tried to fight. Miles closed the laptop. Frank never made it home that night, he said quietly. He's been off-grid for 8 years. I have people looking. He spent the next 3 nights on encrypted calls with forensic accountants in New York and a retired federal prosecutor who owed Ruby a favor from 40 years ago. They rebuilt the entire money trail from scratch. Every cent that should have gone to rank-and-file employees for 11 consecutive years had been siphoned, laundered, and parked in Dad's private empire. On the final morning, Miles carried out a single banker's box sealed with red evidence tape. 468 pages, 2 flash drives, and a cover letter addressed jointly to the Board of Directors and the Securities and Exchange Commission. He set it on the porch, like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Courier picks it up in 20 minutes, he said. After that, the dominoes fall on their own. Ruby stood beside him, arms crossed, watching the snow pile higher. I looked at the box and felt the last chain snap inside my chest. "Send it," I said. Miles lifted it into the courier's gloved hands himself. The van pulled away. Tires left deep tracks that the next hour of snow would erase completely. Inside the house felt different, quieter, final. Tires crunched hard on fresh snow as a black SUV screeched to a stop out front. Ruby reached the window first. Her hand froze on the curtain. "They're here." I moved beside her. Dad's Mercedes sat crooked across the driveway, one wheel on Ruby's lawn. The driver door hung open. Calvin stumbled out in nothing but a dress shirt and slacks tie, flapping loose face the color of raw meat. Sheila followed, coat half-buttoned, boots, unzipped hair escaping its usual perfect chignon in wild strands. They didn't walk. They charged. Dad reached the porch in 4 strides and started pounding with both fists. The whole frame shook. "Valor Marie Becker, open this door right now." Sheila pressed her face to the sidelight, mascara already streaking. "Sweetheart, please. Let us in. We need to talk." Ruby stayed perfectly still. Miles appeared in the hallway behind us, coat off, sleeves rolled, expression carved from stone. Dad kicked the bottom panel so hard the wood splintered at the edge. "You think you can destroy 24 years of my work and hide behind this old hag? Get out here." Ruby unlatched the chain, opened the door exactly 8 inches, and stared him down. "Remove yourself from my property." "Calvin," she said, voice low and lethal. He tried to shoulder the door wider. The chain snapped tight. "You have no idea what you've unleashed," he hissed through the gap. "Do you know who I know? Who owes me favors?" "I know who you stole from," Ruby replied. "Every single one of them." Dad's eyes bulged. Something in her tone made the fight drain out of him for half a second. Sheila shoved forward, palms flat against the glass. "Baby, we're your parents. Whatever they told you, it's lies. Come home and we'll fix everything." I stepped into the gap beside Ruby. Miles positioned himself half a step behind my shoulder, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him. "I'm done being your daughter," I said. My voice was steady steel. "I'm done being your excuse." Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. "You ungrateful," he started. Miles spoke for the first time, quiet and final. "Calvin Becker, you are suspended without pay, effective immediately. A courier is delivering your termination paperwork and the forensic accounting report to your residence within the hour. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been fully briefed. Agents will contact you in the morning." Dad staggered backward 1 step, then another, as if Miles had punched him. Sheila let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. "You can't take our daughter and our life in the same week." "She's 26 years old," Miles answered. "And she just handed me the last piece I needed to finish you." Dad dropped straight to his knees in the snow slacks, soaking instantly. He clasped his hands like he was praying to me. "Valor, please. We'll lose the house, the club membership, Our friends will cut us dead. Have mercy on your mother, if not on me. Sheila collapsed beside him, clutching his arm, tears freezing on her cheeks. We only ever wanted the best for you. Neighbors had already gathered. Phones were out. Red recording dots glowed in the dark. I looked down at the two people who had ruled my entire life with money and fear. You threw me out on Christmas Eve in a silk dress, I said. You don't get to beg for mercy now. Dad tried to crawl forward on his knees. Miles moved past me, stepped onto the porch, and closed the door in their faces. The deadbolt slid home with a loud final click. Through the frosted glass, we watched them stay there, kneeling, shouting, pounding, until their voices cracked and the cold finally broke them. Dad hauled Sheila up by the arm. They stumbled back to the car, leaving footprints filled with blood-red taillight glow. Ruby turned the porch light off. Let the whole street see what they really are, she said. Miles rested a hand on my shoulder. No one opens that door again unless it's the police coming for them. By the time we went to bed, the video was already spreading across every private Lake Placid Facebook group with the caption, "Guess who just got locked out this time?" Ice cracked and shifted on Mirror Lake as spring finally pushed through. Ruby opened the front door one morning to find a tall woman in a navy suit, holding a leather briefcase and a paper cup of coffee. "Eleanor Whitaker," she said, stepping inside without waiting. Ruby called. Said you need the best trust and estates attorney in the state. That would be me. She shook my hand like we were equals, then set the briefcase on the kitchen table and flipped it open. Your maternal grandparents established an irrevocable trust for you. In 2011, she began spreading documents in perfect rows. Principal of $8.4 million payable at age 25, or upon emancipation, whichever came first. Your parents were named co-trustees until you turned 18. She slid a thick file toward me. They never told you it existed. Instead, starting the month you turned 18, they forged your signature on distribution requests and moved the money into accounts they controlled. 11 years. Every quarter. Clean, methodical, and completely illegal. I stared at the forged signatures. My own handwriting, but not mine. The loops on the Y's were wrong. The pressure was too heavy. Eleanor didn't pause. We filed an emergency petition in Saratoga County Supreme Court to remove Calvin and Sheila Becker as trustees, freeze every account they touched, and compel full accounting with penalties. The judge granted it ex parte the same day. She turned to the judgment still warm from the printer. Order signed yesterday. They have 30 days to repay the principal plus 11 years of compounded interest at the statutory rate, another $4.9 million in penalties and my fees. Total judgment $16 million plus change. Ruby poured coffee for all three of us. Eleanor kept going. The SEC filed its permanent bar order against Calvin Becker this morning. He is prohibited for life from serving as an officer or director of any public company or acting in any fiduciary capacity in the securities industry. His licenses are revoked. His name is on every watch list from here to Singapore. I traced the judge's signature with one finger. There's one more thing, Eleanor said, pulling out a final set of papers. Petition for termination of parental rights on grounds of abandonment and financial abuse. New York allows it for adults. The same judge signed this, too. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Calvin and Sheila Becker are legally strangers to you. No inheritance claims, no medical decisions, nothing. She closed the briefcase. The money starts hitting your new account next week. You'll never have to speak their names again unless you want to. Ruby reached over and squeezed my hand once hard. Eleanor stood coat already in her arms. Ruby saved my life 50 years ago, she said. Consider us even. She walked out the same way she walked in Fast, Certain, Unstoppable. Sunlight poured through my new apartment window in Albany the first week of summer. I had the lease in my name, only the utilities in my name, only the mailbox key in my hand. No cosigners. No emergency contacts I didn't choose. The place was small. 1 bedroom, scuffed hardwood floors, but every corner belonged to me. I bought a second-hand desk on Craigslist and set it under the window so I could watch the Hudson while I studied. Those 3 months at Ruby's house, I had taken every free online course I could find, finance, accounting, statistics. I needed proof I wasn't the helpless girl Calvin and Sheila had spent 26 years creating. Miles wrote the recommendation letter himself. 1 page, no fluff. He sent it to the State University Scholarship Committee with my transcripts, and a single line at the bottom: Valor Becker has already survived worse than any final exam. They called 2 weeks later. Full ride, 4 years, housing stipend included. I accepted on the spot. The first disbursement from the restored trust hit my account the same week. I paid rent a year in advance, bought a reliable used car, and put the rest in index funds. For the first time, the money felt clean. Ruby drove down for the move-in day. She carried the heavy boxes, refused help, and hung the same lavender-scented quilt on my new bed. When she left, she hugged me so hard my ribs creaked. "You earned every inch of this life," she whispered. "Don't look back." I didn't. The last time their names crossed my path was a forwarded email from Eleanor. The bank had foreclosed on the Lake Placid house. Auction notices went up in June. Everything inside: the grand piano, the custom dining table that seated 20, the wine cellar they bragged about, was sold at fire sale prices to cover the judgment. Calvin and Sheila now rent a 2-bedroom unit above a dry cleaner on the outskirts of Saratoga. No lake view, no porch, no staff. I never blocked their numbers. They simply stopped trying. I walked to class every morning with headphones in and the sun on my face. Sometimes I pass the business school building and remember the boy they wanted me to marry. He got engaged last month to someone whose father still has money. I smile, keep walking, and never break stride. Freedom isn't loud, it's quiet. It's choosing what time I eat dinner, what color I paint the walls, whose name I answer to. Mine is Valor Becker. And no one will ever lock me out again.